Hello, welcome back. So, the Cailleach, the oldest goddess. So, a few days ago, I released a video for Imbolc, or Groundhog Day, if you're in the USA, which is a Celtic feast day. And I told a story as part of that, which I will put a link to, about the Cailleach and the goddess Bridget and the coming of spring, to illustrate what Imbolc is all about. So today, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the Cailleach, because she's a very interesting primordial goddess, possibly one of the oldest goddesses that we have, or possibly rather new. So I'm going to talk into that little tantalizing thread more towards the end of this video. This is also part of a series of, a new series of videos I'm going to be doing on deities, starting with the Celtic world, probably. So I'm going to call it Deity Tracker, because we're sort of tracking deities backwards in time through the folklore, because as well as a storyteller, I'm a folklorist. So that's an interesting thing for me to do. So if you like what I'm doing and want to hear more about deity tracking, then why don't you like this video and subscribe to it? That would help me a lot. But, you know, up to you, obviously. It's your life. So without further ado, the Cailleach. So this is a goddess well known in the folklore of the Gaelic-speaking world. So that is Scotland, the Scottish Highlands, the Western Isles of Scotland, and Ireland itself. Less so in the southern half of Britain, England and Wales. But possibly a very old goddess, the Cailleach. She is a version of the Great Mother, really. She's said to be mother to all the other gods and ancestor to everyone, including all of us. She's an old crone, or a hag. In fact, the word Cailleach means crone or hag. Etymologically, it actually means hooded one or cowled one. I believe it's where we get the English word cowl or hood, Cailleach. So, old woman wearing a cowl, a bit like a witch, the archetypal image of a witch. So that's what she is, but she's so much more than your common or garden wicked witch. She's the Great Mother. She's also a weather god. So the Cailleach, she makes storms and rain, she makes winter. She's also synonymous with winter. In Scotland, she's also equated with Beira, the queen of winter. So she's the personification of the winter months. So she rules between Samhain, Halloween, and Imbolc, which we've just had, the 1st of February. So now we're coming into the time of the goddess Bridget, the time of spring. But the winter months, the Cailleach rules. In fact, I think she rules till Beltane, actually. Imbolc is just the sign that her power is weakening. So from Samhain to Beltane, that whole period, which is the Celtic winter, almost at the end. So the Cailleach, she also made the world. She literally sculpted the world. She also kind of is the world beneath our feet. Interesting parallels there there's a lot of interesting parallels between the Cailleach and other Indo-European deities. So a common thing in Indo-European creation myths, so both in Celtic and Norse and Hindu mythology, is that there was a primordial being which is kind of killed to make the world. Ymir in Norse mythology, and it's a common motif. So the Beira, the Cailleach sort of is the very ground beneath our feet. Her bones are the mountains, but she also sculpted them. So she's got a stone hammer that summons forth lightning. So very much an Indo-European weather god in that aspect. Think of Thor with his lightning hammer. Think of Zeus. And with this hammer, she sculpts the landscape. And we can really see this with the landscape of, say, the Scottish Highlands. It's so old, it's so weathered. It looks like it's been sculpted long ago. I think it's one of the oldest mountain ranges in the world, not like the Rockies or the Himalaya, which are very young, geologically speaking. That's why they're so pointy. Scotland, ancient landscape. So you can really see how this hag of winter could have sculpted it. She also had some help in this. So her first batch of offspring were frost giants, like Greek titans or Norse storm giants, these fighty primordial beings that would chuck boulders at each other and make storms with their fighting and sculpt the hills. Many of the geological features of Scotland and Ireland were said to have been made by the Cailleach. This, again, is a very common thing in British and Northern European mythology. If there's a big mountain, often it's the work of gods or giants, usually in Britain and Ireland's case, giants. So the Schiehallion, big mountain in Scotland, Ben Nevis, Britain's tallest mountain, was made by boulders falling from the Cailleach's basket, or from her apron, or maybe her sons just lobbing rocks at each other. So you can get an idea of the size of these deities. In some versions of these stories, the mountains are made as stepping stones for the Cailleach to walk over so she doesn't get her apron wet in the snow, I don't know. But yeah, the idea that the very earth was sculpted, shaped by the Cailleach and her offspring, that's how old she is. In terms of what she represents, well, winter, yes, the bringer of storms. Remember, in ancient times, if the Cailleach is that old, winter was very much something to be feared, very, very much so. So you very much had to placate these winter gods. In fact, in a lot of places in Scotland, there's in the Schiehallion mountain I just spoke of, there's a rock shaped like the Schiehallion mountain, possibly an act of sympathetic magic there, with a little offering bowl carved in it. This is Neolithic, this bowl, perhaps to appease the deity of the mountain, so there would be no storms today, please, and some nice weather. That deity could have been a great mother goddess similar to the Cailleach. She also represents wisdom, the wisdom that comes with age and the learning that happens through harsh lessons. So this is kind of more the psychological meaning, interpretation behind the Cailleach and crone goddesses in general. We have to suffer, we're human, but we can turn those sufferings into lessons, and much good can come from them. That's sort of, in a nutshell, that's sort of the psychological meaning behind figures like the Cailleach. It's also worth mentioning that as a crone deity, the Cailleach has a triple aspect, and this is a very, very common thing in contemporary paganism, but there's also a lot of evidence to suggest that it's a very old thing as well, the triple goddess. Robert Graves talks about this in The White Goddess. It's a very, very common motif. So you probably already know about this. There's the virgin as one aspect of the goddess, mother, the maternal aspect, obviously, and crone, which is sort of the distilled wisdom and a sort of necessary destroyer. You know, she gives you a lesson. Yeah, I'll tell you what. But she doesn't sugarcoat it, does she? The crone. So that's what crone energy is all about, and that's what the Cailleach represents. But as I've suggested in my previous video about the Cailleach and the goddess Bridget, the Cailleach sort of represents all three. In fact, most goddesses represent all three. They're sort of squashed into one. They're just sometimes displaying one or the other. So the Cailleach, when winter is past, she actually, in some versions of this folklore, becomes the goddess Bridget, the goddess bride, the goddess of spring, in the more virginal aspect, turning into the mother and then back into crone, into winter, and then the whole cycle just repeats. Now, for me, this is part of the evidence, possibly, that the Cailleach, or something like the Cailleach, is a very, very ancient deity. So the number 3 is very important across the Celtic-speaking world. But specifically in Britain, we get triple goddesses that may or may not have been virgin, mother, crone type triptychs. There's many from Roman Britain, which is very interesting because when the Romans came along, they sort of illuminated the gods that were already here, because the Iron Age Celts didn't make anthropomorphic representations of deities. That was a Roman idea, very, very literal-minded, the Romans. So, a triple goddess. We also get triple hooded figures in Britain. So, very interesting parallel. We don't really know what they mean. They're sometimes seem to be protector goddesses, sometimes seem to be sort of bounty-giving, like the triple mothers, the matras, they're called. So, evidence of this triple goddess in pre-Roman Celtic Britain, which perhaps gives us a clue that the Cailleach is a very, very old deity. If we go further back into the Neolithic, again, great mother goddesses we can assume may have been part of the mixed bag of belief systems, just from the architecture of stone circles and burial mounds and henges and chambered tombs. Quite often the symbology could be when the light on a particular solstice or equinox comes through and impregnates the dark passage tomb, say, of New Grange in Ireland. This symbology could be Sky Father impregnating Earth Mother, so great goddess, Earth Mother that is the landscape. That idea resonates with the Cailleach, so perhaps this is a very, very, very old idea. But perhaps it's a very, 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 very new idea as well. Ronald Hutton is your man to go to. If you haven't heard of Ronald Hutton, please go and check him out. He's a very eccentric character, and if you're interested in paganism, both ancient and modern, and the history of witchcraft and fun stuff like that, go and check out Ronald Hutton. He went to the same university as me, Bristol, funnily enough. In fact, he was a lecturer there. Used to walk past him. I don't know why I've included that in this video, but I did. So Ronald Hutton has an idea that this goddess, the Cailleach, may be a very recent emergent phenomena, maybe as recent as the 18th or even 19th century, when there was a popular resurgence in pagan things. His argument for that is there's not a lot of evidence in the literary record for the Cailleach before the medieval period. So he says this is probably a post-medieval goddess, possibly, which is interesting because it suggests that non-Christian deities can emerge emerge out of the collective human unconscious, to use a Jungian phrase, after the advent of Christianity. But I would argue that she could be both. The Cailleach is both a very ancient deity, with possible evidence of a similar character being revered in Celtic and pre-Celtic Britain, but also could have re-emerged in a new form in the last 200 years. The two things aren't mutually exclusive. I find that interesting about deities. Sometimes they emerge and then recede back into the collective unconscious and they emerge again. That's why deities are so interesting. Hail! There's a lot of other folklore surrounding the Cailleach. Like I mentioned, certain geographical features in Britain and Ireland are said to be made by her, but also in terms of weather divination. So this might be interesting for viewers in the USA, because I think there's a similar tradition around Groundhog Day about predicting whether there'll be a good summer ahead. So as far as the Cailleach is concerned, on Imbolc, 1st of February, Candlemas Day, Groundhog Day, if you have good weather, like we just had a few days ago, you might have a long winter and possibly a bad summer. If you have a bad Imbolc, rain and hail, then you'll have a good summer. Last year, this was true. It hailed on Imbolc. I have a video, which I will show you here. Hail! And we had a blinding hot summer all across the world, which may or may not have been a good thing depending on your views. This year we had quite good weather on Imbolc, so it looks like winter's set to hang around for a while longer if the weather divination is true. Another interesting thing folklorically about the Cailleach, when the Cailleach was defeated and Bridget takes over as Queen of Summer, she, in some stories, she throws her hammer away in rage and it lands under a holly bush. And that's why grass never grows under holly bushes. I love little links between the natural world in terms of the botanical world and folklore. There's so much, I love this sort of thing. There's a lot of that in the last story I told about the snowdrop and Imbolc and that linking into folklore and mythology. If you go check out that video, I'll put a link to it at the end. We can also compare with the Cailleach other hags in Celtic mythology, say Ceridwen, the Welsh witch and primordial goddess. She's very interesting. She also often has a triple aspect. She's a crone, but also a mother. Similar to the Cailleach, you know, that she's a bit ambivalent. She can be cruel, but also very loving. So check out that video. I'll put a link to it too if you haven't seen that. There's another goddess worth mentioning here, and this is very interesting to me. It's actually an Indian goddess, the goddess Kali, who you've probably heard of. Interesting name similarity: Kali, Cailleach. Ceridwen. Etymologically, I don't think they're connected. Cailleach means dark, dark mother. Cailleach, as I've said, means hooded. But they're very similar goddesses, and maybe they share a similar Proto-Indo-European root. So the Proto-Indo-European people that went on to be the ancestors of the Vedic peoples of India and the Celtic peoples of Britain and Ireland. Perhaps they shared a similar goddess, and the Cailleach and Cailleach both emerged out of that now lost goddess, because the similarities are very, very strong. The Cailleach is a destructive goddess, but also creative, necessary destruction. So there's a similar thing going on there. The great mother, the dark mother. Similar things. They're also both blue. The Cailleach is described as being dark blue, and so is Cailleach. The Cailleach also only has one eye, which ties you into a lot of one-eyed nature deities in Celtic folklore as well. So possibly an ancient goddess with Indo-European or pre-Indo-European origins, the Cailleach, or possibly a much more recent deity that has emerged in the last couple of hundred years. Something to ponder there, but I find the Cailleach really, really fascinating. Just this old hag of winter who gives us a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. I might as well end on a personal note. The last video I made on Imbolc, I made that one day before my mum passed away, and we're coming up to our 1-year anniversary of her death now. So that's been a very, very harsh lesson for me, but I've grown a lot in this year. So I suppose the takeaway point for this is no matter what life, what hailstorms and snow and frosty winters life can throw at you psychologically, bride, Bridget, spring is always around the corner, and you can always turn those lessons into gifts. Thanks very much for watching. See you later.